Will the US change Ukraine policy end the Russia-Ukraine war? On February 18, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Riyadh. This was a dramatic reversal of previous US administration's policy of not having peace talks with Russia since the beginning of Russia's war with Ukraine in February 22. The reversal took place because of Donald Trump's election campaign, in which he called for ending the war in Ukraine. Since taking office, President Trump has spoken on phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is also criticized on the platform Truth Social. Will the US's changed Ukraine policy end the Russia-Ukraine war? Kanwal Sibbal and Anuradha Shenoy discussed the question in a conversation moderated by Kulal Bhattacharjee. Is US President Donald Trump's peace overture to Russia a well thought out design, or it is being driven by domestic dynamics? Donald Trump is unpredictable and he could have still swing a surprise. He may change or modify his position or go in a different direction depending on whether he feels that he is getting what he wants. Having said that, he has taken a position on Russia and has actually begun a dialogue with Russia which hasn't existed for the last 3 years. He has reversed the US position on having a dialogue with Russia and on finding a peaceful way out. His principal advisors, whether a Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor or even the Defense Secretary, have made clear statements about their views. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has been pretty harsh towards Vladimir Zelensky. He has called him a dictator. He thinks Mr. Zelensky needs to legitimize himself by organizing elections in Ukraine, which has been Russia's demand too. He says US has pumped $350 billion into the war in Ukraine, though that figure is disputed by the Ukrainian president. Mr. Trump says he needs to recover the $350 billion, and the way he will do it is by forcing Mr. Zelensky to sign an agreement with the US to allow it to acquire mineral rights in Ukraine. So basically, he has reduced it to an economic proposition, but the core issue is not an economic proposition, but the core issue it is the role of US in providing security to Europe. Most importantly, this is the first time that US President has said the expansion of NATO was the reason for Ukraine conflict. Donald Trump is unpredictable and he could still swing a surprise. He may change or modify his position and go in a different direction depending on whether he feels he is getting what he wants. He has reversed the US position on having a dialogue with Russia and finding a peaceful way out. His principal advisors, whether Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor or even the Defense Secretary, have made clear statements about their views. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has been pretty harsh towards Vladimir Zelensky. He thinks Mr. Zelensky needs to legitimize himself by organizing elections in Ukraine, which has been Russia's demands too. He says US has pumped $350 billion into the war in Ukraine, though that figure is disputed by the Ukrainian president. Mr. Trump says he needs to recover the $350 billion, and the way he will do that is by forcing Mr. Zelensky to sign an agreement that with the US to allow it to acquire mineral rights in Ukraine. So basically, he has reduced it to an economic proposition, but the core issue is not economic, it is the role of the US in providing security to Europe. First, Mr. Trump sees the ground reality, which is that Russia is winning the war. A lot of Ukraine's military operations have failed. The war is like a black hole, and a lot of American and European money is going into it. The Europeans obviously want the war to continue, so Mr. Trump is actually managing this defeat in the best way he can. Second, throughout his election campaign, Mr. Trump argued for peace. He has got an overwhelming majority, so he has to please his voters. Third, I think he is resetting the extractive engagement of the military industrial complex of the US vis-a-vis Ukraine with the deal for rare earth minerals. However, we have to remember that much of the Ukraine's mineral wealth is in the Donbas region, which is already under Russian control. Mr. Trump's policy indicates a dramatic shift, and he feels this will be beneficial to American interest. In 2022, Turkey brokered a deal which was scuttled by the US and the UK. Can a similar deal go through this time in Riyadh, even if it involves Ukraine suffering loss of territory? Well, Mr. Zelensky has dug his heels. He has been very defiant. He has, in fact, insulted Mr. Trump. The US Vice President said as much when Mr. Zelensky alleged that Mr. Trump was actually purveying Russian disinformation. He claims that he's got 57% vote in Ukraine, but the fact is that his support levels are exceedingly low. My European sources say that two people who are standing in the way of peace talks are Mr. Zelensky and Yermak, the chief of presidential office. The issue is how long can Europe continue to support Mr. Zelensky? The Europeans are trying to convince the US not to abandon Ukraine as it would be a big defeat for Europe. Mr. Putin visited Saudi Arabia earlier and he enjoys good relations with Saudi Arabia, but at the end of the day, I feel that as long as Mr. Zelensky is there, there will be a problem in forcing a solution because he can continue to say he is unwilling to yield territory. Mr. Trump has many means of convincing the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Zelensky, and other leaders of European Union who are all against a peace deal, because the choice of before Mr. Zelensky is to either agree to what Mr. Trump is putting forth or to face a complete collapse on the battlefield. That is the reality. The minute Mr. Trump withdraws funding, Ukraine will collapse. So it is a choice between the devil and the deep blue sea, and Mr. Zelensky will have to take one. I think the easier one is to go with Mr. Trump's plan because that at least he can ask the US for some security guarantee for the Ukraine that is left after giving up territory to Russia. Plus, he can hope for some economic deals and some reconstruction. In comparison, Mr. Putin is clear as there is no ceasefire yet. The Russian troops will continue to advance. I went to Moscow recently and people are very tough. They feel this is an existential conflict which they have to win. At the same time, they don't want to give up too much of what they already have. Why is it so difficult to find a solution to this war despite such compelling humanitarian argument? The war has reportedly costed around 1 million lives and caused massive displacement in Ukraine. Ukraine is under martial law, so people can't express their opinion freely. The problem in Ukraine came out clearly from Marco Rubio, who, in his congressional hearing, said the problem is Ukraine is not that it lacks weapons; it is that it lacks manpower. A lot of Ukrainian lives have been lost. On the Russian side, the number of casualties and number of injured is around 2 lakh. Ukraine is fighting a losing battle. But more tragically, there is no way to actually gauge public opinion there. Life is more or less normal in Kiev, but there is a strategy to display normalcy in the capital. The war is also raging because of the ultra nationalist and neo Nazi groups who have caused tension during the Soviet era. So long as these people are in power, and they came to power after the Maidan coup in 2014, they will continue to resist any peaceful settlement with Russia, unless, of course, they have no choice and are compelled to do so. Every major country, including India and China, wanted this war to stop, and they were also willing to give their good offices to ensure a quick end to this conflict. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said to President Putin that this is not the time of war, but the decision to end this war will have to be taken by countries who are primary actors in this matter. And ultimately, everyone knows that this is a proxy war of NATO versus Russia and Ukraine. It's not war between Russia and Ukraine, though Ukraine has a big role to play. This invasion would probably not have happened if Minsk 1 and 2 have been adhered to, and if the 22 agreement that Turkey had mediated out had come out. The conflict could have been avoided if the Russians in Donbas area had not been discriminated against and denied their religion, language, and their culture. Ironically, Mr. Zelensky, who fought this election campaign on the platform of peace, himself fell for the strategic calculation of NATO versus Russia, which has led to major losses on the ground. Major Ukrainian units and brigades have faced great casualties, and the Ukrainian men have lost the appetite for this war. Of course, they are patriotic and have done their best, but to me, it seems like a very useless war. It needs to end. Why are the peace talks happening in Riyadh and not in India? Did India miss a chance to mediate? Earlier, these peace talks used to be in Helsinki and Brussels in Geneva. Now, suddenly, they are in Riyadh, which has shocked the European Union and perhaps the rest of the world. I think India has played a role very well in this to the extent that it could by being neutral and critiquing the sanctions and being a good ally of the Russians. The Russians will not forget it, and reset in Russia US ties will be of great benefits to India. Europeans will be the clear loser. I think India will be a winner, and that Mr. Trump sees India as a very close ally of Russia. EU team begins crucial visit. Activist points to rights issues. Leading the delegation, European Commission chief says India is a trusted friend, strategic ally. Sources indicate that Indian side is ready with its arguments in case Manipur situation is raised. In an era of conflicts and intense competition, you need trusted friends. For Europe, India is a friend and a strategic ally. I'll discuss with Prime Minister Modi on how to take our strategic partnership to the next level. In July 23, European Parliament had called upon India to end the clashes in Manipur, which often took sectarian and communal dimensions involving Meitei and Kukizo communities. India had hit back strongly at the time and condemned the EU's remark as interference in India's domestic affairs. Government appoints Tuhin Pandey as the new SEBI chairman. Court seeks trials records on Mumbai 26/11 attack. Karnataka slams Shah on delimitation. Tamil Nadu CM list languages followed by Hindi, Bhojpuri, Maithili, Awadh, Braj, Bundeli, Garhwali, Kumaui, Marwari, etc. Law trying to protect children born of live-in relationships. Uttarakhand government. No privacy rights are violated in the UCC. It is only a regulatory mechanism to protect the interest of women and children. UCC establishes a draconian statutory regime of inquiry, authorization, and penalization of choice. Mr. Grover replied, a critical reading of UCC revealed that it could heighten harassment and violence against women and couples who don't go by majoritarian views. Modi lauds Adityanath for conduct of Mahakumbh. In a blog, PM says, event united people from all sections of society and urges them to join in a similar way for Viksit Bharat. No nod for funeral prayers for Mirwais Skin at Jama Masjid. UGC to release norms to end caste bias in colleges, varsities. 1,300 complaints on caste discrimination under 2012 regulations. Bhopal toxic waste. Supreme Court not to intervene in High Court order. India's olive ridley turtle numbers improve, but climate skews sex ratio. Banks will take cautionary stance on lending to NBFCs. Centre seeks to reduce the share of states in federal tax reserves. At least 40% from the current 41%. will be made to the Finance Commission of India and could lead to flaring of tensions between the two tiers of the government. Arvind Panagaria. Government unveils move to boost port efficiency. One nation, one port process to standardize and streamline port operations across India's major ports and improve efficiency was unveiled by Minister of Shipping, Ports and Waterways. In line with these goals, Logistic Port Performance Index named Sagar Ankalan was also unveiled. Trump to slap the European Union with 25% tariffs. Bloc vows to vigorously fight back. Bangladeshi students who led protests launch a new party. Bangladeshi students who played a key role in overthrowing the government have announced a new political party. Karnataka slams Shah remarks on delimitation, no negotiation over annexed Ukrainian territory, Kremlin. CAG report on excise policy referred to PSC. Panel will examine it in detail and submit its report within 3 months, says Speaker. So that's all for today. See you in the next one.